Welcome to the RiZN Gen Podcast, where we dive into all things inspiration for raising the next generation to rise. Rise through engaged and empowered parenting in these unique times. We're all about raising them to rise in truth and grace and embracing godly ways. Joining us today is a very special guest, Jamie Pettit, the author of Annoying Love. Jamie is not only one of our esteemed panelists for the upcoming Empowered Parents Gathering on September 3rd, but he's also a parent who has successfully, alongside his beautiful wife, guided 4 children into adulthood. With profound insights into intentionally nurturing the next generation to rise, Jamie understands the challenges of holding onto your parenting vision while navigating your child's pushback. So let's dive in to this episode and glean valuable insights from Jamie Pettit on raising the next generation with intention and consistency. Hi, Jamie. I'd like to start here. For me, it relates to music, and I would love to get your insights on this. For one, I'm a words person, as you probably figured. And so words have an impact on me, and I understand the power of words. It delves deeply in, like, even if you think it's just in the atmosphere, you're just hearing it, whatever you feed your ear gates can have the ability to disciple your mind and your desires, your proclivities, and so forth. But the words are like, I have a 10-year-old and she's going into middle school, and some of the sentiments were just not the type of things that I want to be feeding her mind, especially being a parent, a former educator in the brick and mortar, where the desire for popularity and fitting in and changing who you are in order to do so, it's very rampant. Anxiety, depression, social pressures, and so forth. And so I know my daughter's not there, but I'm like, I don't want you feeding this kind of thinking. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's absolutely true. I come from a singing background, having started that in terms of my passion and doing those things, which my daughter carries that same passion today. She's one of your worship leaders, but...
Oh, the lady with the phenomenal voice.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you some stories about that later on. But, to your point, we stepped, and I say we as a society, we stepped into a sight and sound generation about a decade or two ago, and it's become more prevalent, more in your face. And now with, the abuse of not only music, but the use of music, I guess you would say, in abusive ways, and maybe from society's point of view, it's, get with the times, but there is that pull, there is that grab, because music is so powerful. I mean, it was yes. Part of the reason that, Lucifer, the archangel, fell and became, Satan himself. He was the orchestra, the song leader, if you will, in heaven. Mm-hmm. And he began to see the benefits of that worship and wanted it for himself. Mm-hmm. And we know that God reserved the song, the worship, that creative element that tends not only to touch the soul, but the spirit as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's no surprise that that's being used in perverted ways and in different ways. I mean, you look at the genre of music today and how it's really affected people in so many facets of our community, as well as, music and school and so forth. And yes. So, yeah, I can see and understand your point of why you want to, keep some of those things, because it's the subtlety of music yes. that begins to kind of break down the barriers. And that's how we move from having a little leaven to leavening the whole bread, the whole lump, as scripture says. So, you as a parent have to guard that, as well as any and everybody else that's related, because as I mentioned in the book, we raise our children with a village, but we've got to make sure that the villagers are speaking the same language yeah. as we are. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we have to figure out, who we want to be those players in our lives. And sometimes that's a tough decision to make.
It sure is. And I totally agree with you about basically breaking down those boundaries and desensitizing you to certain things. And as you mentioned, it is subtle. It is not overt. Because if it were more overt, then ding, 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 there would be a siren off, hopefully. But that's not how the enemy operates. He didn't do that in the wilderness with Jesus. He said, the word said, he quoted some scripture, right? It was with the subtleties. And yeah, I totally agree with you. And not only am I desiring to create these guardrails, so to speak, or these boundaries, I'm also communicating why. Even sharing from the standpoint of things that I struggled with, not having the parenting or having the shepherding growing up, I learned the hard way. Music had an impact on me, and I shared with her how I was able to overcome that. Yes, we're putting these boundaries, but we're also discipling you, teaching you along the way, and obviously modeling. I don't listen to certain music because I know the impact it could have on me, but also the atmosphere. I remember Judah, he was listening to some music in the car. It was Christian music. And I was having a really rough day as I was putting away laundry. And he just came in out of the overflow of what he's been listening to, started singing a worship song. And those words that he spoke lifted my spirits because it redirected my thoughts to what was positive, what was life-giving, what was true. Music it creates an atmosphere too. And I want a specific atmosphere in my home and it to be life-giving and spirit-filled and so forth. So I hope that resonated with her, although her face did not look very happy with having to change. And I was like, okay, you can choose another song. But although I was annoying, I'm also teaching her and hopefully providing a sensitivity in her own mind, in her own heart, in her own spirits, because I'm not going to be around her always. So ultimately, what I teach is going to be in her head. But my desire through prayer and just consistency, I just pray as I'm faithful, the Lord will be faithful to let the seeds grow.
And to emphasize what you're saying, it's part of intentionality.
Yes.
You have to set the tone. And, fortunately for us, when you go back several decades, it was a little more simpler. Today, it's really accelerated and you got all kind of flavors of stuff out there. But what we saw was we had a great Christian radio station in our community, his radio. Mm-hmm. It stayed on practically all the time. Cassettes or CDs, which came, afterward. We only bought those mostly for Christian. I mean, because I sang a lot. And so, singing was a great part of what I did in ministry in addition to, the other things as well as parenting. And so our kids embraced that because we made it kind of a subculture of, hey, this is who we are. And the coolest thing we used to get is, the kids would come down and one of our favorite songs was the Kurt Franklin song. Mm-hmm. God's people, God's property. Yeah. And they would come down and turn that on and dance around, like crazy kids. And we had fun with it. And so we allowed certain things to be that benefit and also to set the tone for what we wanted in our home. Mm-hmm. And when we did choose to buy our kids music and things like that, and even, do things such as, watch programs and TVs, we tried as much as we could to guard that because we knew that, ears were listening to certain things. And we, as much as we could, tried to, keep that as a forefront thing as far as what we wanted and our expectation of that with our children. Now, that's not to say we did everything perfect because we didn't. We would sometimes listen to some things, but, there was a standard for which we kept in terms of what we allowed in terms of even movies and music and things like that. And you have to do that. Even more so today. Yes. It's so out there. I mean, even you take a Disney movie you were mentioning, one that just came out recently, it's fun, it's happy, it's got a lot of stuff, but there's some stuff in there. If you're not careful, you can really, see that there's some directives and there's some pointing of certain tones and things that are going on even in that show that you're like, well, I don't know. Because, when it gets to the part where she's going in and chasing, something having to do with, death and things like that, seeing all all the little things happening. It may look cute, but you really have to guard, because it starts to set in kids' minds, and then the next thing you know, you kind of erode some of that spirituality with some of this other stuff, and it can create some bad situations, and even put fear and things like that in kids today.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Oh, it's infiltrating so many parts of our culture, even the cartoons. And it's subtle, because the kids are not going to be aware. That the fact that I'm aware of it, I'm like, oh, do I really want to? Sometimes it's hard, because this seems just so innocent to them. Do I really want to point things out, or just not allow them to watch this because mom is aware of some of these subtleties and they're not? And it can sometimes become a bit much when you're like, oh, which battle do I, is this okay? What are your thoughts about that?
Pretty much what we tried to do and still do even today is we try to set a tone, to use that word again, and a precedent for what we want. Mm-hmm. We want to create an atmosphere that's, a kingdom dynamic as much as possible. So we guard as much as we can, and we did with them. If we watched a movie and started watching it and it seemed like it was heading in a direction that we didn't like, or we thought was, probably more in a wrong place rather than in a right place, we would oftentimes stop, take the movie out, or whatever the case was. And even today, we do that within ourselves, even though we're at home by ourselves. Mm-hmm. As empty nesters, we have to guard it too. If we're listening to something, or if we start to watch a program, like, nah, I don't know about that one. If it's got something in there that just don't feel right, don't look right, we just shut it down. Mm-hmm. And we've done that many times with, back in the times when you rent a movie or something like that and you start watching it, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is bad. So we'll just shut it down and take it back, or whatever the case is, or turn it off. So, yeah, you really have to do that. I mean, that's become a very tough thing today, because used to you knew where the lines were. The lines are, blended. There's so much in that middle ground that, mm-hmm. You've got a set of Christians that thinks it's okay. And you got another set that thinks, it's way, you got the left, the right. Mm-hmm. And there's just a tough place. And, like you said, you really have to, referee, if you will, and guard, blow the whistle when it's out of bounds, and make the necessary, decisions to decide, hey, this is what we're going to be about. And kids won't always like it, and that's the annoying mm-hmm. part, because it may be the coolest thing that everybody's doing. They may want the coolest clothes, the coolest whatever, but you draw the line, and that's the way it is. They won't like it, and but we're not, as parents, we're not in a popularity contest of trying mm-hmm. to please the kids. Yes. We're not their friend, we're their parent, and we're their spiritual guardians, and we have to live as such.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I love it. What keeps reverberating in my mind is you have to have a vision that directs the tone that you want to set. And with that vision and tone, that is where the yeses are, and also the nos. I like to say, God won't give you a no unless he gives you another go, if that makes any sense. The no, is something that will lead to death, but God says to go to life. So what is something else that you can replace that with, or go towards, that will actually be life-giving? Because sometimes, they might feel so deprived of XYZ, but also direct them to, hey, but this will give life, and explain that as well. Because it aligns with the tone and the convictions and the kingdom that you want to encourage in your home and beyond. I think one of the things you said earlier, and you mentioned in your book, being vigilant about your village. That's tough.
Things like that can be very hurtful. Even some friends and families that did things, we were like, well, you might do it, but that's not what we want to do. I mean, you have to draw the line.
Yes.
And people will call you excess. They'll call you all the religious stuff, they can, but you just have to guard it because, again, times have changed so strongly that influence is beyond just, hey, it's, kind of harmless or anything like that. It's very harmful now.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that across all major platforms. And just like we mentioned, the sight and sound generation, the enemy uses that. That's a mountain. There's a ministry. His name is Lance Wall now, and he talks about the 6 or 7 mountains, and one of those is entertainment.
Yeah.
Of conquering that. You don't have to own the mountain. You just have to get to the tipping point of it where you control the influence, which is what we see today. And even though the majority of people are opposed to things, it's who has the loudest voice, and they control the media outlets, all the major secular media outlets, and because of that, they can influence culture to be the way they want it, even though that's not really where it is. And so we as parents have to see that, sense that, and then we have to say something to it. The word says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord say so."
Yeah,
we have to stand up and not just let our children be sucked into that, because it increases each generation. And I mentioned that in the book, how one generation, when it passes to the next, it's not just a one effect. It's the cumulative. Yeah, it's like 10 to the first power goes 10 to the second power, and so forth and so on. And so we really have to respond to that in the way you're talking.
Yes, I definitely agree. So on that note, what does it mean to raise our children, the next generation, to rise in this day? How would you explain that, I guess, in short?
Yeah, so if you think of it like this, as a believer, one of the hallmarks of being a born-again believer is knowing that there has to be some kind of death. Now, we're not talking about a natural death, but there has to be a spiritual death. In other words, I have to become dead to what I want in order to become yielded to what Jesus wants, right? So in that same context, we have to shape our children's will by influencing and creating, that ability for them to stand up and to have the Spirit of God come alive in them. We have to let them understand that the Spirit is more active than what we understand, because, there's not a lot of emphasis on it. Everybody talks about, the flesh and the carnal things. But if we emphasize being able to deny those things, and as parents help to deny those things, and not only tell them, but also demonstrate that kind of life where you're denying yourself in some things in order for your spirit to be strengthened.
Yes.
So that's part of it.
Yes, I love that. When you said death to certain things, death to the ways of the flesh, the ways of the world, the ways of the enemy, there's also life. Death to those things, but baptism, that's identifying with the death, burial, and then the resurrection of Jesus. And I think about how Jesus died. He like, I remember at the very end, he said, "The enemy has come, but he has found nothing in common with me." He was the walking dead, and so to speak, in terms of him being deaf to the things and the ways of this world and the ways of the enemy. And he died as us, taking our place, being sinless himself, so that we could rise. In the same way, what you said about dying, I believe you're right. We are to lead our family, our children, to die so that they can truly live.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more we emphasize things of the carnal nature of the flesh and all of these things that are out there, the more we become sensitive to wanting it. But if we are not careful, our spirit becomes desensitized, and there's less an understanding. That's why there's a lack of power in the church today, because we focused more on platform than we have presence, and until we understand that there's something greater and better that we need to pursue besides how it looks and sounds, but where's the heart? And that's one of the things my wife has really been great about in our life and in ministry, is she's a heartbeat. She's there. She's not the vocal person. She's not the one out there wanting to be seen and heard, but she's behind the scenes, and she carries kind of speak softly, carry a big stick, if you will. You know, she's very adamant as a spiritual mother as well as a mother and things like that. So that's necessary that we have that in order for us to be victorious as believers. Now, if you don't want to be a believer and you want to do it your way, you know, people are always welcome to do that. But I think as a believer, we're called to a higher place. We're called to bring forth godly seed that will impact and change our generations, you know, going forward. And that's the way it has to happen. It has to happen in the home. It has to happen in the family unit. And, you know, no school's going to do it. And as much as church can augment it, it's not the church's responsibility, you know, to do that.
I agree. So with that, what you just said, we are both active and love our local church. Where do they meet? Now that's a great place to end part 1. Tune in for part 2 next. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you were inspired to raise the next generation to rise. And for further inspiration, please join us at the Empowered Parents Gathering taking place September 3rd here in the Upstate at the Bridge. Please register today to be encouraged to rise as empowered parents of our day. See you September 3rd.